My name is David Miller, and I'm 56 years old. If you were sitting across from me now, you'd probably see just another middle-aged man with graying hair, a calm smile, and a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. You might think I've had a steady, predictable life. But behind the wrinkles and the slow way I sip my coffee is a story most people don't expect. A story about how chasing the American dream nearly broke me before it saved me. I was born in 1969 in a small town in Ohio. My father, Robert Miller, worked long shifts at the General Motors plant, coming home each evening with grease on his hands, exhaustion in his eyes, but pride in his stride. My mother, Eleanor, was a schoolteacher. She carried herself with quiet dignity, and she believed in books, learning, and the power of education like it was gospel. I grew up with two siblings. My older sister, Linda, was the wild one, always dreaming of moving away, which she eventually did, marrying young and heading to Texas. My younger brother, Michael, was the opposite, practical, grounded, the kind of kid who fixed bikes for the neighborhood at 15 and saved every dollar he earned. Then there was me, stuck in the middle, dreaming bigger than either of them. I was the college kid, the one who would carry the family's hopes beyond our little town. My mother believed it with her whole heart. I still remember the morning I left for school. She hugged me so tightly at the bus stop, I thought she'd never let go. "David," she whispered, "college will change your life. It's your ticket to freedom." My father, standing behind her with his rough hands shoved into his pockets, nodded silently, as if to say, "Make this count." I believed them. Maybe too much. The brochures made it all look so simple. Leafy campuses, smiling students in crisp suits, bold promises of opportunity. Nobody told me about the fine print, the part where opportunity came tied to debt. Student loans were easy to sign. I was 18, barely old enough to understand interest rates, but the papers slid across the table, and I signed them with the careless optimism of youth. By the time I graduated, diploma in hand, I was already in a prison I couldn't see. $120,000. That was the number chained to my ankles before I'd even stepped into the working world. At first, it didn't feel real. I had a decent job offer, an entry-level position at a finance firm in Cleveland. My starting salary looked impressive on paper, $42,000 a year. But the math didn't add up once reality set in. Rent, groceries, transportation, health insurance, and then the crushing monthly loan payments that seemed to eat half my paycheck before I even touched it. That's when the credit card started. At first, they felt like lifelines. Swipe for groceries, swipe for gas, swipe for dinner out with friends when I didn't want to admit I couldn't afford it. The bank seemed eager to help, offering higher limits, new cards with shiny promises of cashback and rewards. If they trusted me with more credit, I thought, I must be fine. But that was the trap. Easy money is never free. My sister Linda called me one evening from Texas, telling me how she and her husband had just bought their first house. "You should come visit," she said cheerfully. "It's only a couple of plane tickets." I laughed it off, knowing I couldn't afford airfare, let alone the time off. My brother Michael, meanwhile, had gone straight into trade work after high school. By 24, he had bought a used truck, cash. No debt, no interest, just his. When I saw him pull into my parents' driveway, proud as could be, something twisted inside me. I had the degree, the so-called golden ticket, but he had the freedom. Still, I told myself I was doing okay. Everyone had debt, right? That's what society kept saying. Credit cards, student loans, car payments. This was just part of adulthood. I convinced myself the future would be brighter. Promotions would come, raises would arrive, and the numbers would balance out eventually. But debt isn't just numbers. It's weight. Invisible, but heavy enough to crush you from the inside. By the time I was 30, the weight had seeped into everything. Relationships, sleep, even my health. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, hearing my father's words in my head. "Make this count." I wondered if I'd failed him. My mother still sent me letters with clipped-out articles about smart investing or how to save on a budget, as if a magazine column could fix the hole I'd dug myself into. I wanted to tell them how bad it really was, but pride kept my mouth shut. Pride and shame. One Sunday at dinner, my father looked across the table and asked casually, "How's work, son?" I nodded and smiled. "Good, Dad. Busy but good." The truth. My credit card balance had just hit $18,000, and I was late on a payment. But I couldn't say it. I couldn't look into those tired, hard-working eyes and admit that the sun who was supposed to rise above had instead dug himself deeper. That silence, my silence, was the beginning of the nightmare. Because when you hide debt, it grows. Like mold in the dark. And by the time you finally switch on the light, it's everywhere. I was drowning, but nobody could see it. On the outside, I wore the same suit and tie as everyone else. On the inside, the American dream was eating me alive. When I was in my 20s, I thought I was smart with money. After all, I had graduated, I had a job, and I wore a suit every morning while catching the 7:15 train into downtown Cleveland. I looked the part of a man on his way up. What nobody could see, what I refused to let anyone see, was how much of my life was being financed by plastic. The first card came in the mail the summer after graduation. "Congratulations, David Miller. You're pre-approved for $3,000. $3,000, just like that, without me asking. I still remember the feeling of holding that shiny piece of plastic, embossed with my name, as if it were some kind of badge of adulthood. I swiped it for groceries that week, justifying it with, "I'll pay it back next month when my paycheck comes in." Of course, I didn't. Within 6 months, I had 3 more cards. The limits kept growing, $5, $000, then $10,000. The banks called it creditworthiness. I called it survival. Rent was due before my paycheck cleared, so onto the card it went. Gas for my car? Swipe. Dinner out with friends? Swipe. Emergencies, like the time my old Honda Civic broke down and needed $900 in repairs? Swipe, swipe, swipe. Every problem seemed solvable with one motion of my hand. It felt like magic money, painless and easy. I told myself I was in control, but really, the cards controlled me. The student loans weren't any better. They sat in the background like a silent predator, interest compounding day after day. My original $120,000 didn't stay at $120,000 for long. By the time I was 25, I owed closer to $140,000, thanks to deferments and interest. I didn't fully understand how fast debt grows when you ignore it. The statements came each month, but I shoved them into a drawer, unopened, convincing myself I'd deal with them later. Meanwhile, my brother Michael was living a life that made me both proud and jealous. He had become a skilled electrician, working steady jobs and stacking away savings. No student loans, no credit cards, no late-night panic attacks about bills. One afternoon at my parents' house, I overheard him tell Dad, "Debt just isn't worth it. If I don't have cash for it, I don't buy it." Dad chuckled and clapped him on the back, proud. I smiled too, but inside, shame burned like acid. I wanted to tell them how bad things really were. But how do you admit to your father, the man who spent 40 years in a factory to give you a chance, that you've already lost control? How do you confess to your mother, who believed education was the path to freedom, that the degree she was so proud of had become my prison? So I stayed silent. I kept pretending. The illusion of easy money spread into my personal life too. When I started dating Sarah, the woman who would later become my wife, I took her out to dinners I couldn't afford, bought her gifts with money I didn't have. I didn't want her to see the cracks. She deserved better than my reality, so I built an illusion instead. But illusions always crack. By the time Sarah and I moved in together, the bills had reached a boiling point. I remember one evening sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes. Credit card statements, student loan reminders, utility bills. Sarah sat across from me, arms crossed, concern written all over her face. "David," she said softly, "how bad is it?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her it was manageable, that I had it under control. But the truth slipped out. I don't know if I can catch up anymore. She looked at me for a long time, not with anger, but with disappointment. That was worse. The worst moment came when I applied for a loan to consolidate my debt. I thought it would be simple. Roll everything into one manageable payment. Instead, the bank officer looked at me like I was reckless. My credit score had plummeted, and the interest rates they offered were insultingly high. Walking out of that office, I felt like the world had finally stamped me with a label I'd been avoiding: failure. Debt isn't just financial, it's emotional. It seeps into your skin, into your thoughts, into your relationships. Every ringing phone made my stomach twist, because it might be a collector. Every unopened envelope on the counter looked like a reminder that I wasn't enough. Even my body carried the stress, headaches, sleepless nights, a constant knot in my chest. Yet, despite it all, part of me clung to the illusion. I told myself promotions would come, raises would fix everything. Maybe one big break in the stock market could wipe it all away. Easy money had got me into this mess. So surely easy money could get me out. That's the dangerous lie debt whispers. That the problem is temporary. That salvation is just one more swipe away. But the truth was simple. I was spending money I didn't have to live a life I couldn't afford. And sooner or later, the illusion would shatter. It finally did, loudly, painfully, and in a way I'll never forget. If debt had only been numbers on a page, maybe I could have lived with it. But debt has a way of crawling out of the statements, seeping into conversations, and poisoning relationships you never thought could break. Sarah was the first to feel its full weight. When we met, I wanted so badly to impress her. She was thoughtful, steady, the kind of woman who looked you in the eye and made you feel like you mattered. I didn't want her to see the cracks, so I painted over them with dinners out, weekend getaways, and gifts I had no business buying. All of it went on plastic. She thought she was dating a man who had it together. The truth was, she was dating a man sinking fast. The first real argument came 6 months into living together. We were sitting at our tiny kitchen table, bills scattered like confetti. She held one in her hand, an overdue notice from the utility company. Her voice was calm, but her eyes gave her away. "David, how many of these are there?" I froze. She had never asked directly before. I wanted to brush it off, but the stack of envelopes on the table spoke louder than I could. "Too many," I muttered. "Too many." Her voice cracked, and she set the bill down slowly. "You told me you had everything under control." "I thought I did," I said, shame burning through my chest. I didn't want to worry you." Her face hardened. "Not worrying me? David, we're supposed to be building a future together. How can we do that if you won't even tell me what's real?" That night ended with her crying quietly in bed while I sat in the living room, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering how the hell I had let things get this far. But it wasn't just Sarah. My parents could sense it too. One Sunday dinner at my parents' house, Mom served her famous pot roast, the one she only made on special occasions. The table was full, Dad at the head, Michael cracking jokes about work, Linda visiting from Texas with her husband. Everyone laughed except me. I pushed food around my plate, my mind stuck on the overdue notice I had hidden in my briefcase. Dad noticed. He always noticed. "You're quiet tonight, son," he said, sipping his sweet tea. "Everything all right at work?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just busy." But Michael wasn't buying it. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You look stressed, Dave. You working too many hours? Or is it the bills piling up?" The room went silent. My fork clattered against the plate. Mom frowned at Michael. "Don't tease your brother." But it wasn't teasing. He had hit too close to home. I wanted to lash out, but instead I said nothing. My silence was louder than words. Later that night, as we were leaving, Mom pulled me aside. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes carried worry. "David, whatever it is, you know you can talk to us, right?" I nodded, hugged her, and lied. "I'm fine, Mom." I wasn't fine. I was drowning. Debt made me a liar, not in the malicious sense, but in the quiet, everyday way that erodes trust. I lied by omission, by pretending, by smiling when I wanted to scream. The worst moment came with Sarah again. We were supposed to go on a trip to Chicago for her cousin's wedding. She was excited, talking about dresses and hotels, about how nice it would be to get away for a weekend. I nodded, pretending to share her excitement, but inside panic gnawed at me. I didn't have the money. Not even close. A week before the trip, I broke. "Sarah," I said one night, "I don't think I can go." She looked at me, confused. What do you mean you can't go? We already RSVP'd. I can't afford it. The words spilled out like poison. I don't have the money for the hotel, or the travel, or even a suit right now. Her face fell. She stared at me, then shook her head. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't want you to think less of me. Less of you, she snapped. David, I don't care if you're rich or broke. I care that you hide things from me. Do you understand what that does to me? To us. I had no answer. Debt wasn't just straining my wallet. It was straining love, trust, and every bond one valued. Even with Michael, the distance grew. He never said it outright, but his life was a mirror I didn't want to face. He owned his truck outright, paid cash for most things, and always seemed calm. Meanwhile, I was juggling bills like flaming torches, praying not to get burned. Every time he joked about me being the smart one with a degree, I smiled weakly, but inside, the words stung like salt in a wound. The more the debt grew, the more I withdrew. Friends invited me out. I made excuses. Family wanted visits. I claimed I was too busy. Sarah wanted to talk. I shut down. It was easier to retreat into silence than to admit the truth. But silence has a cost. It builds walls where there should be bridges. By my early 30s, the walls were high. Sarah and I were still together, but cracks ran deep. Family dinners felt like interrogations I wasn't ready for. Michael and I barely spoke. And my parents, sweet, hardworking, loving, kept looking at me with that quiet concern that said they knew something was wrong, even if I wouldn't say it. Debt had started as numbers on paper. Now it was threads pulling at every relationship, unraveling the fabric of my life. And I didn't know how to stop it. The night everything shifted wasn't dramatic to anyone else, but to me. It felt like the world cracked open. I was sitting in my apartment living room, the only light coming from the bluish glow of the past due notice in my hands. It was from the electric company. The words "Final Warning" were stamped in red at the top. If I didn't make a payment by Friday, they'd cut off the power. It wasn't the biggest bill I'd ever ignored, but it was the one that broke me. I was 34 years old, educated, employed, and engaged to a woman I loved. And yet I was about to sit in the dark because I couldn't manage my own life. For the first time in years, I stopped running from the truth. I put the notice down on the table, buried my face in my hands, and whispered, I can't live like this anymore. That moment was my rock bottom. And sometimes, rock bottom is exactly what a man needs to find solid ground. The next day, instead of going out to lunch with coworkers, I sat at my desk and Googled how to get out of debt. It felt embarrassing, almost childish, but I didn't care anymore. I was desperate. That search opened a door I didn't know existed. Blogs like Mr. Money Mustache, podcasts about budgeting, YouTube videos where ordinary people talked about clawing their way out of tens of thousands of dollars in debt. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. One phrase stuck with me. You can't change what you don't track. So that night, armed with nothing but yellow legal pad and a pen, I wrote down every single debt I had. Credit cards, student loans, car payments, medical bills. It was all there, ugly and raw. The number at the bottom made my stomach twist, but seeing it in black and white gave me something I hadn't felt in years, clarity. Sarah walked in while I was hunched over the table. What are you doing? She asked cautiously. I looked up at her, eyes tired but determined. I'm done lying to myself. I'm writing it all down. She sat beside me, scanned the paper, and let out a long breath. For a moment, I expected anger, maybe even the end of us. Instead, she reached for my hand. Okay, she said softly. Then let's do this together. Her words lit a spark in me. The first step was brutal, the budget. I had never truly budgeted before. I thought I had, but in reality, I was just guessing each month and hoping the numbers worked out. Now I faced the truth. Every dollar had to be assigned. Rent, food, transportation, debt payments. There was no room for fantasy anymore. We cut ruthlessly. No more dinners out. No vacations. No new clothes unless absolutely necessary. I canceled the gym membership I barely used, the streaming subscriptions, the weekly takeout habit. At first, it felt like punishment. But over time, something shifted. I began to see those cuts not as losses, but as choices. Choices that bought me back a piece of freedom. I also attacked the credit cards. I cut up 3 of them that night. Not canceled, just cut, to keep myself from using them. I kept one for emergencies, but even that sat buried in a drawer. For years, swiping had been second nature. Now, cash and debit became my reality. If I didn't have it, I didn't buy it. The method that saved me was the snowball. I lined up my debts from smallest to largest and focused every extra dollar on the smallest, while making minimum payments on the rest. When the first card was gone, I rolled that payment onto the next one. The momentum built slowly, but it was intoxicating. Every time I crossed out a balance on that yellow pad, I felt lighter. Sarah noticed the difference, not just in the bills, but in me. One evening, after I paid off my first card, I walked into the living room grinning like a fool. She raised an eyebrow. "What's got you so happy?" I handed her the statement. "Zero," I said simply. Her smile lit up the room. "I'm proud of you." It wasn't just the balance that had changed. It was me. For the first time in years, I felt in control. But discipline wasn't just about cutting back. It was about learning. I devoured everything I could on personal finance. Books like The Total Money Makeover. Podcasts about investing and saving. Articles on budgeting apps. I scribbled notes like a college student cramming for finals. I learned that money wasn't about math. It was about behavior. And my behavior had been the problem all along. Slowly, the fear that had ruled my life was replaced with focus. I tracked every dollar. I celebrated small wins. I started an emergency fund, just $500 at first, but it felt like a fortress compared to the nothing I'd had before. There were setbacks, of course. Unexpected car repairs, a medical bill, temptations to slip back into old habits. But each time, I reminded myself of that night with the electric bill in my hand. I never wanted to feel that powerless again. By the time I turned 40, something incredible had happened. I wasn't debt-free yet, but the tide had turned. The balances were shrinking, not growing. The anxiety that once kept me up at night was giving way to cautious optimism. Most importantly, Sarah and I had become a team. We fought less, talked more, and dreamed again. Not of fancy vacations or big houses, but of something much simpler and far more valuable: peace. And for the first time since I was 18, I believed it might actually be possible. The day I wrote my last check, the air felt different. Lighter, sharper, almost electric. I was 50 years old, sitting at the same wooden kitchen table where I had once cried over overdue bills, except this time, the paper in front of me wasn't a warning notice, it was freedom. I signed my name slowly, almost reverently, on the final student loan payment. 27 years after I first signed those promissory notes at 18, the number at the bottom was 0. My hand trembled as I placed the check into the envelope. I sealed it, pressed it flat against the table, and whispered to myself, "It's over." Sarah walked in just then, her hair tied up in a messy bun, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She looked at me curiously. "What's that look for?" I pushed the envelope toward her. "The last one," I said. She froze, then slowly reached for the envelope as if it were fragile glass. When she realized what it was, tears filled her eyes. She set the coffee down and wrapped her arms around me, whispering, "We did it." For years, debt had been the silent third partner in our relationship. Now, for the first time, it was just us. Life didn't change overnight, but it changed in all the ways that mattered. The constant hum of anxiety, the one that used to wake me up at 3 a.m., was gone. Instead of dodging phone calls from creditors, I answered my phone without fear. Instead of hiding unopened envelopes in drawers, I opened the mailbox with calm. Money was no longer my master. Sarah and I rebuilt our dreams, this time on solid ground. We saved for an emergency fund that could cover 6 months of expenses. We started investing, not chasing quick wins, but steady, patient growth. Vacations weren't escapes anymore. They were celebrations, paid in full before we packed our bags. One of my proudest moments was taking Sarah to Italy for our 20th anniversary. We walked hand in hand through cobblestone streets in Florence, ate pasta under strings of lights, and watched the sunset over the Arno River. Every moment felt sweeter because it wasn't borrowed, it was earned. My family noticed the change too. At a Sunday dinner years later, Dad, older now, with thinner hair and slower steps, sat back in his chair, watching me laugh with Michael and Linda. He cleared his throat and said, "Son, I'm proud of you." I looked at him, confused. For what? For turning it around. For not letting it break you. His eyes softened. You made it count. Those words undid me. For decades, I had carried the weight of his silent expectations, afraid I had failed him. To hear him say that it was worth every sacrifice. Even Michael, the practical brother who had never been in debt, admitted one night over a beer, "You know, Dave, I didn't think you'd make it, but you proved me wrong." Respect. Coming from him, that meant everything. Mom, though frail by then, pressed a hand against mine and said, "I always knew you'd find your way." Her faith had been steady even when mine wasn't. But the story didn't end with me. Once I was debt-free, I felt an urge I hadn't expected to tell my story. For years, I had hidden behind shame. Now, I realized that silence had been part of the problem. People are drowning everywhere, in student loans, credit cards, car payments, and most of them feel alone. I wanted them to know they weren't. I started small. I shared with friends, then co-workers. At first, it was awkward. But then something surprising happened. People leaned in. They asked questions. They confessed their own struggles. They wanted to know how I did it. So I began writing online. Blog posts, social media threads, little pieces of advice mixed with honesty about my journey. To my shock, people read them. Strangers emailed me, saying, "Your story sounds like mine. You give me hope." One young man even told me he cut up his credit cards after reading my post. Me, the man who once couldn't pay his electric bill, was now helping others take back control. Through it all, I discovered a truth that no brochure, no lender, no glossy American dream pamphlet had ever told me. Freedom isn't about what you own. It's about what doesn't own you. I used to think success meant a big house, a new car, luxury vacations. But those things are hollow if they come with chains of debt. True wealth is peace of mind, the ability to sleep at night, the power to say yes or no without fear. At 56, I don't have the fanciest car or the biggest house. What I have is better. A life built on discipline, honesty, and freedom. Sarah and I live simply, love deeply, and give generously. And when I look back at the young man who signed his name on those loan papers, I don't see failure anymore. I see a man who fell, who struggled, but who got back up and learned. If you're reading this and you're in the place I once was, drowning, ashamed, convinced you'll never make it out, listen to me, you can. It won't be fast, and it won't be easy. But step by step, dollar by dollar, you can climb out. I'm living proof. Because the American dream isn't about the car in your driveway or the size of your paycheck. It's about freedom. And freedom has no price tag.